A millionaire lives in seclusion ever since losing his family in an accident. Everything changes when a lost boy enters his home, crying from cold and hunger. What would have been just another night becomes the beginning of an unlikely bond. And this unexpected encounter awakens a love he believed had died forever. If this story interests you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Let's continue. The mansion stood imposingly in the Kensington district of London, but its grandeur no longer impressed anyone. The high walls, covered in wild ivy, hid gardens that were once immaculate and were now lost to tall grass and withered flowers. The windows remained shut, with heavy curtains preventing any ray of sunlight from entering. It was as if the house itself had died along with its inhabitant. Edward Anderson was 42 years old, but he seemed to carry the weight of a much longer existence. Tall, with dark hair already speckled with white, he moved through the house like a ghost. 3 years had passed since the accident. 3 years since his wife Helen and his daughter Julia left for a weekend trip and never returned. The driver lost control on the rain-slicked road, and the car rolled over several times before falling down an embankment. Edward wasn't in the car that day. He had stayed behind to finish an important project at the office, a project that now meant nothing. Since then, he had sunk into silence. He resigned from his job as a civil engineer, cut contact with friends and relatives, and stopped answering the phone. Mail piled up in the letterbox, unopened. Neighbors had tried to reach out at first, bringing food, offering company, but Edward always refused with a cold politeness. He preferred solitude. He preferred to live among the furniture covered in white sheets and the portraits he avoided looking at, but couldn't bring himself to take down from the walls. His days were all the same. He would wake up late, make coffee he barely drank, and wander aimlessly through the rooms of the house. Sometimes he would sit for hours in the living room armchair, staring into space. Other times, he would go up to his daughter's room, which remained untouched, with the toys arranged, the children's books on the shelf, the pink comforter with a unicorn print. He would touch the objects lightly, as if afraid of breaking them, and then leave quickly, his chest tight and his eyes burning. The October night arrived, cold and damp. Edward was in the kitchen, heating up a canned soup he'd bought at the supermarket weeks ago when he heard a noise in the living room. His first thought was to ignore it. It could be the wind, a cat that had gotten in through the half-open pantry window, anything. But the noise continued, now accompanied by a low, muffled, childish cry. Edward felt his heart race. It couldn't be. He left the pot on the stove and walked slowly to the living room, turning on lights as he went. And then he saw him. A small boy, too thin for his age, was huddled near the front door. His clothes were dirty and torn at the hems, his face stained with tears and dust. His dark eyes were wide with fear, but also with desperation. He couldn't have been more than 7 years old. He was shivering so hard that his teeth were chattering. Edward stopped, unsure of what to do. How long had it been since he'd seen a child up close? How long since he'd spoken to anyone besides the grocery delivery man? The boy looked at him and began to cry louder, as if he had been holding it all in until that moment and could no longer contain it. Edward knelt slowly, keeping his distance so as not to frighten him further. He tried to soften his voice, though it was rusty from so much silence. "How did you get in here?" The boy sniffled, wiping his nose on the sleeve of his worn-out t-shirt. "The door was open. I just wanted a place to stay. I'm cold and hungry, and my mum didn't come back." The voice came out in broken sobs. Edward felt something strange stir inside his chest, something he thought had died along with Helen and Julia. It was compassion, or maybe it was just the basic human instinct to protect a vulnerable child. "Where is your mother?" "I don't know. She went to work and said she'd be back, but it's been a long time. I was all alone. I tried to wait, but the food ran out, so I went out to look for her and got lost. I walked and walked and walked. It was dark. I was scared. I saw your house with the door open and came in." Edward then realized he had indeed left the door unlocked. Lately, he had been so distracted that he forgot to lock doors, to close windows. Not that it mattered. He had nothing left to lose. "What's your name?" "Gabriel." Edward. Are you hungry, Gabriel? The boy nodded so hard his whole body shook. Edward stood up and held out his hand, hesitantly. Gabriel looked at the hand for a moment, then gripped it tightly as if he were afraid Edward would disappear if he let go. In the kitchen, Edward served the still hot soup in a deep bowl and placed some bread beside it. Gabriel devoured everything in silence, with only the sound of the spoon clinking against the ceramic. When he finished, he wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and looked at Edward with a gratitude so pure it hurt. Edward prepared a warm bath, found an old T-shirt of his that served as a nightgown on the boy, and improvised a bed on the living room sofa with clean blankets. Gabriel curled up, completely, only his face showing, his eyes already heavy with sleep. "Are you going to leave?" The question came out laden with panic. "No, I'll stay here in the armchair. You can sleep." Gabriel closed his eyes, but every few minutes he would open them again, checking to see if Edward was still there. Gradually exhaustion won, and he fell asleep, his breathing finally calm. Edward stayed awake all night, watching this unknown boy in his living room. How many times had he done this with Julia when she was little and had nightmares? How many times had he sat by her bed just to make sure she was okay? The memory was painful, but for the first time in 3 years, it wasn't just pain. There was something else. A flicker of purpose, perhaps. When the sun began to peek through the cracks in the curtains, Gabriel woke up screaming, his hands clutching the blanket in desperation. Edward jumped up and went to him, sitting on the edge of the sofa. "It was just a nightmare. You're safe." The boy was crying, his body shaking. Edward, without much thought, placed a hand on his shoulder, a small gesture, but one that seemed to calm Gabriel. Slowly the sobs subsided, and he lay back down, still holding onto Edward's hand as if it were an anchor. When Gabriel fell back asleep, Edward finally allowed himself to feel the weight of it all. There was a lost boy in his house, a boy who needed help. And he, Edward, who had locked himself away from the world for so long, now had a choice. He could call the authorities, hand Gabriel over to the system, and return to his solitude. Or he could do something different. In the morning, Gabriel woke, up calmer. Edward prepared milk, toast with butter, and orange juice. As the boy ate, Edward pulled up a chair and sat across from him. "Gabriel, I need you to tell me everything. Where do you live? What's your mother's name? Do you remember anything that can help me find her?" Gabriel chewed slowly, thinking. "We lived in a small house far from here. There's a market nearby and a school. My mom's name is Maria Smith. She worked cleaning houses, but it never paid enough. Then she said she was going to get a new, better job and that she'd have to be away for a little while. But she said she'd be back, only she didn't come back. How long has she been gone? I don't know. I think it's been many days. I was counting, but I lost track." Edward felt a pang of anger. How could a mother leave a child alone like that? But he quickly realized the story might be more complicated than it seemed. Maybe Maria had no choice. Maybe she was stuck somewhere, unable to return. Or maybe something worse had happened. "Do you remember your home address?" Gabriel shook his head. "But I remember how to get there, if we walk, I think. Then let's go, let's find your mother." The determination in Edward's voice surprised him. It had been so long since he had cared about anything, since he had taken any action. But there, looking at this boy who gazed at him with hope, he felt he had to do this. Not just for Gabriel, but for himself too. They took the car, a black sedan that Edward barely used. Gabriel gave directions with uncertainty, but gradually the streets began to look familiar to him. They left Kensington, passed through increasingly modest neighborhoods, until they reached a peripheral area in South London. The houses were small, packed tightly together, with peeling paint and barred windows. Children played in the street vendors shouted their offers, the sound of loud music came from a nearby house. "There it is!" Gabriel pointed to a house with a green gate, low walls, and a tiny yard. Edward parked, and they both got out. The gate was ajar. Gabriel pushed it open and ran in, calling for his mother. Edward followed, a tightness in his chest at what he might find. The house was silent. The front door had no lock, just a piece of wood propped against it. Inside, the scene was desolate. Old, dust-covered furniture, a torn sofa, an old television that no longer worked. In the kitchen, dirty dishes were piled in the sink, spoiled food scraps, flies buzzing around. In the small room that Gabriel shared with his mother, there was only a single bed with grimy sheets and a mattress on the floor. Clothes were scattered about, an open suitcase, documents thrown on top of the dresser. Edward sifted through the papers while Gabriel looked around, his eyes filling with tears again as he realized his mother truly wasn't there. Among overdue bills, old receipts and unpaid invoices, Edward found something. A flyer from an employment agency with a handwritten note on the back, live-in job, immediate start, and an address, Acacia Avenue, 1247, Surrey. Edward also took a calendar that was hanging on the wall. The dates were crossed out with a pen, one by one, until September 23rd. Today was October 15th. Maria had been gone for almost a month. Gabriel was holding a drawing that had been on the bed. It was a child's drawing, done with colored pencils, showing a woman and a boy holding hands with a bright yellow sun in the sky. Underneath, in shaky letters, was written, "Mommy, come back soon." Another paper had the phrase, "Missed you today." Edward felt a lump in his throat. He put the flyer in his pocket and knelt beside Gabriel. "We're going to find your mother. I promise." On the way back to the car, Edward noticed an older neighbor watching from her window. He stopped and went over to her. "Excuse me, do you know Maria, the woman who lived in the house?" The neighbor nodded, suspicious. "I do. Why?" "I'm a friend of the family. I'm trying to find her." The woman frowned. "She left a while ago. Left the boy all alone. I tried to help, brought food a few times, but then the boy disappeared too. I thought they'd left together." "Did she say where she was going?" "Said she'd found a good job far away, with a house and everything. Said she'd be back to get the boy in a few days. But she never showed up again. I even thought about calling social services, but I felt sorry for her. I know how hard things can be." Edward thanked her and returned to the car. Gabriel was quiet, clutching the drawing to his chest. The next day, Edward went to the employment agency listed on the flyer. It was a small office in a commercial building in central London, with a cramped room, a noisy air conditioner, and yellowed posters on the walls advertising positions for cleaners, cooks, and housekeepers. Behind the desk, a receptionist with long, fake nails typed on her phone without looking at him. "Good morning. I'm looking for information about Maria Smith. She got a position through this agency about a month ago." The woman looked up, bored. "We can't give out information about clients." "I'm a relative. I need to locate her urgently." "Even so, I can't help you. You need to bring documents, authorization, things like that." Edward took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Her son is with me. A 7-year-old boy who was abandoned because his mother left for work and couldn't come back. If you don't give me this information, I'll have to contact the authorities and report that this agency is sending women to jobs without ensuring they can maintain contact with their families." The threat worked. The receptionist sighed, annoyed, and began searching the computer files. "Maria Smith, you said? Let me see." "Ah, found her. She was placed in a live-in domestic worker position in a gated community in Surrey. It says here it was supposed to be temporary, a 3-month trial period. The family that hired her is the Mendons. Address Acacia Avenue, 1247. Edward wrote it all down. "Did she have permission to leave to visit her family?" "That I don't know. We just handle the placement. The rest is between her and the employer." Edward left the agency with a mix of relief and worry. At least now he knew where Maria was. But why hadn't she returned? Why hadn't she come for her son? Something wasn't right. Back at the mansion, he found Gabriel playing in the garden with sticks, drawing pictures in the dirt. The boy ran to him as soon as he saw the car. "Did you find my mum?" "I know where she is. We'll go get her tomorrow." Gabriel smiled for the first time since Edward had met him, and that smile lit up the boy's thin face in a way that made Edward feel he was doing the right thing. That night, While Gabriel slept in the guest room Edward had set up with clean sheets and fluffy pillows, Edward stood on the balcony looking at the stars. He thought of Helen and Julia. He thought about how much time he had wasted mourning, trapped in pain, refusing to live. And now, because of an unknown boy who had stumbled into his house by chance, he felt that maybe there was still a reason to wake up in the morning. He didn't know what he would find the next day. He didn't know if Maria would be okay, if she would accept help, if things would be easily resolved. But for the first time in 3 years, Edward Anderson felt he had a purpose, and that was more than enough to keep going. The next morning, Edward woke up early and prepared a full breakfast: pancakes, fruit, juice, milk. Gabriel ran down the stairs, still in borrowed pajamas, his eyes shining with anticipation. They sat together at the kitchen table, something Edward hadn't done since Helen and Julia were gone. The house felt different, more alive, as if it were waking from a very long sleep. After they finished, Edward helped Gabriel get dressed in clothes they had bought the day before at a department store: jeans, a blue t-shirt, new sneakers. Gabriel looked at himself in the mirror and smiled, running his hand over the clean, fresh-smelling fabric. It had been a long time since he'd had new clothes. "We're going to bring your mom home, right?" "Right." The two got into the car and headed towards Surrey, an affluent area on the outskirts of London, known for its luxurious gated communities and tree-lined streets. The journey took almost an hour, with Gabriel glued to the window, watching the landscape change from grey buildings and busy streets to large houses with manicured gardens. When they arrived at the address, Edward immediately understood why Maria hadn't been able to return. The community was surrounded by high walls and iron gates with electronic surveillance. A uniformed security guard approached the car, scowling. "How can I help you?" "I've come to visit an employee who works here. Maria Smith." The guard consulted a clipboard. "Maria Smith? She works for the Mendon family, but there's no visitor authorization listed here. It's urgent. I'm responsible for her son." The guard glanced at Gabriel in the back seat and hesitated. He picked up his radio and spoke to someone on the other end. After a few minutes, he waved Edward forward. "You can come in, but I'll notify the house. Wait at the main gate." Edward parked in front of an immense mansion, with a facade of glass and stone, impeccable gardens, and a glistening swimming pool in the back. Gabriel held his hand tightly, nervous. The front door opened and a middle-aged woman in elegant clothes and with a haughty expression came down the steps. Beside her, a man in a suit, presumably her husband. "Who are you and what do you want with my employee?" Edward kept his voice firm. "I'm Edward Anderson. This is Gabriel, Maria Smith's son. I've brought the boy to see his mother." The woman's face soured, clearly annoyed. "Maria didn't mention she had a son. Our contract is clear. Live-in employees cannot have visitors without prior authorization, especially not children. She does have a son, and he's been alone for almost a month while she works here. I need her to see the boy, now." The man stepped forward, trying to be intimidating. "Look here, Mr. Anderson. I don't know who you think you are, but you can't just show up here and make demands. Maria is our employee, and she follows our rules. If she lied about having a son, that's her problem." Edward felt his anger rising, but he maintained his composure. "If you don't let me speak with Maria, I will consider her to be held here against her will, and then I will have to contact the authorities." The threat worked again. The woman rolled her eyes and signaled to someone inside the house. Minutes later, Maria appeared. Maria emerged from the back door of the mansion, wearing a simple domestic worker's uniform, her hair tied in a tight bun. She was about 30, with brown skin and tired eyes that carried sleepless nights and endless worries. When she saw Gabriel, her face transformed. The mask of composure shattered, and she dropped the cleaning brush she was holding, running towards her son. "Gabriel! Mommy!" The two met in the middle of the garden, embracing each other desperately. Maria knelt and covered the boy's face with kisses, tears streaming down her face uncontrollably. Gabriel clung to her as if he feared she would disappear again. They sobbed together, unable to speak, just feeling each other's presence after so much time apart. Edward stood still, watching the scene with a lump in his throat. This was pure, desperate, broken love. Maria's employer, on the other hand, tapped her foot impatiently, her arms crossed. "Maria, get back to work now. You are not authorized to have visitors." Maria stood up slowly, still holding Gabriel against her, and faced her employer with a mixture of fear and courage she had never shown before. "This is my son. I haven't seen him in a month. You can't stop me from hugging my own son. You lied on your application. You said you didn't have children. Our contract is clear. Live-in accommodation is only for single employees, without dependents. Children are not allowed on this property." "I didn't lie. I said I lived alone, and that was true. But I do have a son, and he was being looked after. I just couldn't get back to see him as I had planned. You never gave me permission to leave." "Because you're on a trial. Period. 3 months without a day off, as we agreed. After that, you would have 1 Sunday a month. Those were the conditions you accepted." Edward stepped forward, his voice firm and restrained. "Excuse me, but that's abusive. No one can work for 3 months straight without seeing their family. That's against the law." The employer's husband advanced, puffing out his chest. "Who are you to come here and dictate rules in my house? This is a private agreement between us and our employee. If she's not satisfied, she can leave." Edward held his gaze. "And that's exactly what's going to happen. Maria is coming with me, along with her son." Maria looked at Edward, surprised and grateful, but also scared. She looked at her employer, at the husband, and then at Gabriel, who was still clinging to her waist. Her voice came out trembling. "I need this job. I have overdue bills. I have nowhere else to live. If I leave now, I won't even get paid for the work I've done." The employer smiled coldly. "Exactly. So I suggest you say goodbye to the boy and get back to work. Otherwise, consider yourself fired with no compensation." Edward felt fury explode inside him. It had been so long since he had felt anything but emptiness, and now it was rage. Rage against these people who exploited the needy, who treated human beings like disposable objects. "How much does she earn here?" The employer's husband laughed dismissively. "That's none of your business." Edward took out his wallet and quickly counted the notes. He had enough. More than enough. He couldn't even remember the last time he had used cash. He held out his hand with a generous wad of bills. "Here is the equivalent of 3 months' salary, more than double what she would have received here. Now she owes you nothing. Maria, get your things, we're leaving." Maria looked at the money, then at Edward, not understanding what was happening. Who was this man? Why was he doing all this for her and Gabriel? But she didn't have time to process. Gabriel pulled her hand, and she felt that in that moment nothing else mattered. Only being with her son. "I'll get my things." The employer laughed, outraged. "You won't find another job with this on your record. I'll personally make sure every agency in the area knows you abandoned your post. Do what you want." Maria ran into the house, up to the tiny room she occupied on the top floor, gathered her few clothes into a cloth bag, and came back down. She had brought almost nothing from home, just the essentials. And now she was returning with even less, but with what mattered most, the chance to be near her son. In the car, the silence was broken only by Maria's muffled sobs as she held Gabriel on her lap in the back seat, pressing him against her chest as if afraid he would vanish again. Gabriel, for his part, couldn't stop looking at his mother's face, touching her cheeks, her hair, making sure she was real. Edward drove in silence, giving them space. Only when they were far from the gated community did Maria finally manage to speak. "Thank you. I don't know who you are, but thank you for taking care of Gabriel, for getting me out of that place. I don't know how I'll ever repay you for all this, but I swear I'll find a way." "There's nothing to repay." "But I can't just accept charity like this. I have my dignity." Edward looked in the rearview mirror, meeting Maria's eyes. "It's not charity, it's help. And we all need help at some point." "But why? Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." Edward hesitated. He didn't quite know how to explain. How to say that he was doing this as much for them as for himself? That Gabriel had walked into his house and, without knowing it, had begun to dismantle the walls Edward had built around his heart. "Because your son needed you." And because I know what it's like to lose the ones we love." Maria sensed the hidden pain in those words and didn't press further. She just murmured another quiet thank you and went back to hugging Gabriel, now in silence, letting the tears fall freely. When they arrived at the mansion in Kensington, Maria looked around, impressed and uncomfortable. The house was enormous, with automatic gates, vast, if neglected gardens, and a structure that must have had at least 8 bedrooms. How could someone live alone in a place like this? Edward showed them the house, the guest room where Gabriel had slept, now with clean sheets and a teddy bear. Edward had bought the day before without much thought. Maria held the toy gently, surprised. "You bought this for him?" "I thought he'd like it." Gabriel hugged the teddy bear tightly, pressing his face into the soft fur. "Thank you, Mr. Anderson. You can just call me Edward." Maria was shown to another room, this one larger, with a double bed, a spacious wardrobe, and a window overlooking the garden. She placed her bag on the floor and sat on the edge of the bed, still processing everything. Edward stood at the door, not sure what to say. "You can stay here as long as you need. No rush, until you get on your feet. And what do you want in return?" The question came out harsher than Maria intended, but she needed to know. She was used to deals. No one gave anything for free. There was always a catch, an expectation, something hidden between the lines. Edward understood the suspicion. He didn't judge her for it. "Nothing. I just want you and Gabriel to be okay." Maria stared at him, searching for signs of a lie, of ulterior motives. But she only saw sincerity and exhaustion, and a sadness, so deep she recognized it immediately, because it was similar to her own. "You lost someone, didn't you?" Edward nodded slowly. "My wife and my daughter, 3 years ago." "I'm so sorry." "Me too." They stood there, the two of them, sharing a silence that said more than words ever could. Two strangers united by pain and the attempt to rebuild something that seemed impossible. In the following days, the routine of the mansion changed completely. Gabriel would wake up early, excited, and run to his mother's room to make sure she was there. They had breakfast together in the kitchen, talking about simple things. Maria insisted on helping, cleaning, cooking, organizing. Edward tried to tell her it wasn't necessary, but she insisted. She needed to feel useful. She needed to repay him somehow. Edward enrolled Gabriel in a nearby private school, buying a uniform, school supplies, a new backpack. Maria protested, saying it was too much, but Edward was firm. Every child deserves an education, and Gabriel is smart. He'll do well. On the first day of school, the three of them went together. Maria held Gabriel's hand tightly, nervous. It had been so long since she had been able to give her son anything more than food and shelter. Now he was going to a real school with proper facilities, qualified teachers, and classmates his own age. Gabriel entered the classroom with wide eyes, amazed by the colorful walls, the books on the shelves, the toys in the corner. The teacher welcomed him with a warm smile, and Gabriel waved to Maria and Edward before sitting at a desk near the window. On the way home, Maria cried again, but this time they were tears of relief. "I never thought I'd be able to give him this. A good school, a safe place. Thank you, Edward, truly. He'll be fine, and so will you." The weeks passed, and their life together settled into a rhythm. Edward started leaving the house more, taking Gabriel to school, going grocery shopping, driving Maria to job interviews. She found a position as a cashier at a nearby supermarket, with decent hours and a proper contract. It didn't pay much, but it was dignified, and more importantly, it allowed her to see Gabriel every day. In the evenings, the three of them had dinner together. Edward, who had spent years eating alone in the dark kitchen, now found himself surrounded by conversation, laughter, and stories about the day. Gabriel would talk about the friends he was making at school, about the games at recess, about his nice teacher. Maria would talk about funny customers at the supermarket, about a co-worker who had become a friend. And Edward, for the first time in so long, felt like he was part of something. It wasn't the same as what he had before. It never would be. Helen and Julia couldn't be replaced, but it was something new. A second chance to matter to someone one night. After Gabriel had gone to bed, Edward and Maria were in the living room drinking tea. She looked around at the furniture that was no longer covered by sheets, at the portraits that Edward could finally look at without turning away. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why were you so alone when Gabriel found you?" Edward took a sip of tea, thinking about the answer. "Because I thought I didn't deserve to be happy. I thought that if they were gone, I should stop living too. I spent 3 years just existing, until your son walked through my door and reminded me that there are still reasons to keep going." Maria felt her eyes burn. "He has that gift. He always has. Even in the worst moments, when we had nothing, he would smile. And that smile made me believe that everything would get better. And it did. Thanks to you." Edward shook his head. "No. Thanks to the 3 of us. You're an incredible mother, Maria. Gabriel is lucky to have you." Maria blushed slightly, not used to compliments. She quickly changed the subject, but she held those words in her heart. However, not everything was easy. Gabriel started having problems at school. Some classmates teased him for living in a mansion but coming from a poor family. They called him the adopted one, the charity case, the poor little boy. Gabriel would come home quiet, his eyes red from holding back tears all day. Edward noticed and one afternoon asked Gabriel to talk in the garden. They sat on the wooden bench near the large tree, with the sun filtering through the leaves, creating patterns of light on the ground. "Do you want to tell me what's going on?" Gabriel kicked a small stone with his foot, avoiding Edward's gaze. "The boys at school keep saying I'm not real, that you're only taking care of me because you feel sorry for me, that my mom is a maid, and that we shouldn't be here." Edward felt the anger return, but he kept his voice calm. "And what do you think about that?" Gabriel shrugged. "I don't know. Sometimes I also think we shouldn't be here, that it's all wrong, that you'll get tired of us and send us away." Edward placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, firm and comforting. "Listen to me very carefully, Gabriel. Family isn't just about who shares your blood. Family is about who chooses to stay, who takes care of you, who cares. And you and your mother are my family now. It doesn't matter what those boys say. You deserve to be here. You deserve every good thing life has to offer." Gabriel finally looked at Edward, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "Really? Really?" Gabriel threw himself into Edward's arms, hugging him tightly. Edward hugged him back, feeling something warm and painful expand in his chest. This boy had become so important to him, so essential. How had it happened so quickly? That night, Maria received a phone call. It was her former co-worker from the gated community, the one who worked next door to the Mendon's house. Her voice was low, frightened. "Maria, I need to tell you something. You got out at the right time. The boss fired 2 more employees after you left. One of them had a young child too, just like you. She tried to hide it, but they found out. They sent her away without paying her anything. Said she had violated the contract." My God. And there's more. The police came here the other day. It seems other families in the area are being investigated for conditions similar to modern slavery. Excessive hours, withholding documents, not allowing them to leave. You were lucky to get out when you did. Maria hung up the phone with trembling hands. She remembered the 3 months without a day off, the threats, the coldness. She remembered how many times she had thought of running away, but was too afraid of losing the only job that offered housing. If Edward hadn't shown up, how much longer would she have been trapped there? She told Edward everything. The next morning, he listened in silence, his jaw tight. "You didn't deserve to go through that, nobody does. But so many people do, and they have no one to help them." Edward thought about that for days. There were so many women like Maria out there. So many people trapped in abusive situations because they had no choice. Maybe he could do something. Maybe he could use his resources, his position, to help more people. It was an idea that was beginning to sprout, but he didn't yet know how to put it into practice. Meanwhile, life went on. Gabriel did better in school, learning to ignore the mean comments and befriending kinder classmates. Maria excelled at her job and was promoted to cashier supervisor. Edward started volunteering at a children's shelter, sometimes taking Gabriel with him. Seeing the boy play with other children, who were also going through hardships, made Edward realize how much Gabriel had grown, how much they had all grown. One rainy November afternoon, as the three of them were watching a movie in the living room with popcorn and blankets, Gabriel fell asleep between Edward and Maria, his head resting on her shoulder, his feet on Edward's lap. Maria looked at Edward over her son's head and smiled, a tired but genuine smile. Edward smiled back. In that moment, without words, they both understood that this was more than just help, more than just gratitude. It was a real connection, a family forming slowly with broken pieces fitting together in an unexpected but perfect way. When the movie ended, Edward carried Gabriel to his room, gently laying him in bed and covering him with the comforter. Maria stood at the door watching, her heart tight with emotion. Edward returned and they went downstairs, together, sitting in the living room in a comfortable silence. "Thank you for everything, Edward. Not just for getting me out of that place, but for making Gabriel so happy, for making me feel safe again. You two made me happy too. I had forgotten what it was like to have someone to care for, to have a reason to wake up in the morning. Gabriel saved me as much as I saved him." Maria felt a courage grow inside her, something she hadn't felt in a long time. "Edward, I know this might sound strange, but I wanted you to know that you're special to us, not as someone who is helping us temporarily, but as someone who is a real part of our lives. And I—" Maria hesitated. The words caught in her throat. It was too risky, too vulnerable. What if Edward didn't feel the same? What if she ruined everything they had built together? Edward noticed her hesitation and moved a little closer, his voice soft. "You what?" Maria took a deep breath and decided to be honest. After all, they had been through so much, they had seen each other at their worst. It made no sense to hide now. "I think I'm growing attached to you in a way I didn't expect, and it's not just gratitude, it's more than that. When you smile, when you play with Gabriel, when you're just around, I feel whole. I know it's too soon, that maybe I shouldn't be feeling this, but I can't help it." Edward was silent for a moment that felt like an eternity. Maria was already bracing for rejection, for the embarrassment, when he finally spoke. "I feel it too. I have for weeks. But I was afraid to admit it. I was afraid of betraying Helen's memory. I was afraid that you were only here out of necessity, not by choice." Maria felt her eyes fill with tears, but this time they were tears of relief. "I'm here because I want to be, because you make me feel like I can start over, that I can be more than just a mother struggling to survive. You make me feel seen." Edward reached out his hand, and Maria took it. Their fingers intertwined naturally, as if they had always done so. They sat there on the sofa, holding hands, letting the silence say what words could not. In the following days, their relationship subtly changed. Nothing dramatic, just small gestures that hadn't existed before. Edward would hold the door for Maria. She would make his coffee just the way he liked it. They would exchange glances during dinner that made Gabriel roll his eyes and complain they were being mushy, but the boy would smile, because he saw their happiness, and that made him happy too. One afternoon, while Maria was at work and Gabriel was at school, Edward received an unexpected visitor. It was his cousin Frederick, someone he hadn't seen in over 2 years. Frederick was a lawyer, always well-dressed, always calculating. He was heir to a smaller part of the family business, but always felt he deserved more. "Edward, what a surprise to see you answer the door. I thought you'd have hired someone for that." Edward didn't hide his annoyance. "What do you want, Frederick?" Frederick walked in uninvited, looking around with excessive interest. "I heard you're living with a woman and a child. I was curious. After all, you spent years locked up in here, refusing all contact, and suddenly this story pops up. Who are they?" "A friend and her son. They're going through a hard time and I offered to help." Frederick laughed, a humorless sound. "Help? Or are you being manipulated? Because from what I hear, this woman appeared out of nowhere, and now she's living in your house, using your money, and you're footing the bill for everything. Don't you find that suspicious?" Edward clenched his fists, trying to stay calm. "There's nothing suspicious. Maria works, she pays her own bills. and Gabriel is a child who needed help. If you've only come here to make insinuations, you can leave." Frederick raised his hands, in a gesture of peace, but the cynical smile remained. "Easy, cousin. I'm just worried about you. We're family after all, and I wouldn't want to see you being taken advantage of, especially considering you're still quite emotionally vulnerable." Edward took a step forward, his voice low but firm. "Get out of my house, now!" Frederick left, but not before casting one last appraising look around the room. Edward slammed the door shut, his heart pounding. He knew that visit hadn't been innocent. Frederick was sniffing around for something. He was probably eyeing the inheritance, worried that Edward would leave. Everything to Maria and Gabriel. Greed had always been the hallmark of that side of the family. When Maria got home from work, Edward told her about the visit. She turned pale. "Do you think he'll cause trouble?" "I don't know, but we'll be on our guard." Edward's concern proved justified. In the following weeks, they began receiving visits from social workers. The first was a friendly woman, Dr. Patricia, who asked basic questions about Gabriel's situation, how he was adapting, if he was attending school, if he had medical care. Edward and Maria answered everything honestly, and the social worker seemed satisfied. But then came other visits, more invasive, more suspicious. A man in a suit who introduced himself as Dr. Rogers began asking questions about Edward's emotional stability, his history of depression after losing his family, whether he was truly fit to care for a child. "Have you undergone psychological treatment?" "I have. Right after the accident. I was in therapy for a year." "And how are you now? Do you still experience depressive episodes?" Edward hesitated. He didn't want to lie, but he also didn't want them to use his pain against him. "I'm fine. Much better than I was. Gabriel helped me find a purpose again." Dr. Rogers noted everything on a tablet, his expression neutral. "I see. And the relationship between you and the child's mother, is it romantic?" Maria, who was also in the room, answered before Edward could. "We're friends. Edward took us in during a difficult time, and we're building a life together. I don't see a problem with that. The problem, Mrs. Smith, is that sudden relationships in situations of vulnerability can be questionable. We need to ensure the child is in a stable and healthy environment." "He is. Gabriel has never been happier." Dr. Rogers just nodded, made a few more notes and left, leaving a heavy atmosphere in the air. "They're going to try to take Gabriel from me, aren't they?" Maria was on the verge of tears. "I won't let them." Edward held her hands firmly. "We're going to do this the right way. I'm going to start the adoption process, legally, officially. Then no one can question it." "But what if they don't let you? What if they decide you're not fit? What if—" Edward pulled her into a hug, feeling her body tremble. "We'll fight. Together. For Gabriel. For us." The lawyer Edward hired, Ms. Eleanor Vance, a competent and respected professional in London, explained the situation clearly. "The adoption process can be long and complicated, especially because you're a single man, you've recently experienced a trauma, and you're clearly emotionally involved with the child's mother. They will question your motivations, your stability, everything." "What do I need to do?" "First, the biological mother must formally consent to the adoption. Then you will undergo psychological evaluations, home visits, interviews. A judge will review everything and decide if it's in the child's best interest." "And how long does that take?" "It could take anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. It depends on many variables." Edward swallowed hard. 2 years was a long time, but he had no choice. He had to do this the right way. Maria signed all the necessary documents, consenting to the adoption. She cried as she put her signature on the paper, not because she didn't trust Edward, but because it was terrifying to legally give up her son, even temporarily, even if it was for his own good. "You're still his mother, Maria. You always will be. This is just paper. What matters is what's in the heart." She nodded, wiping her tears, but the fear remained. The process began officially. Edward underwent intense psychological evaluations, sessions with psychologists who asked difficult questions about his grief, how he had overcome it, whether he was truly ready to be a father again. He answered with brutal honesty, not hiding the pain, but also showing the healing, showing how Gabriel had brought light back into his life. The home visits continued. Social workers would show up unannounced, observing the interaction between Edward and Gabriel, asking the boy questions when they thought the adults weren't listening. "Gabriel, do you like living here?" "I like it a lot." "Is Edward nice to you?" "Yes, he is. He helps me with my homework, plays with me, takes me to school, and he always lets me talk to my mom whenever I want." "Do you miss living with just your mom?" Gabriel thought for a moment. "Sometimes. But now we're together again, and Edward too. It's better this way. We're a family now." Gabriel's words were included in the report. Dr. Patricia, the nicer social worker, wrote a positive evaluation highlighting the clear bond between Edward and the child and the loving, structured environment they were providing. But it wasn't all easy. Frederick, Edward's cousin, filed a petition challenging the adoption. He claimed that Edward was not mentally stable, that he was being manipulated by Maria, and that the whole situation was irregular. Worse, Frederick insinuated that Maria might only be interested in Edward's money, and that Gabriel was being used as a tool to gain access to the family fortune. The hearing was scheduled for a cold January morning. Edward, Maria, and their lawyer arrived at the courthouse early, nervous but determined. Frederick was there too, accompanied by his own lawyer, an intimidating-looking man who kept shuffling through papers. The judge presiding over the case was Judge Carmen Riley, a middle-aged woman known for being fair but extremely thorough. She first heard the arguments from Frederick's lawyer, who painted Edward as a fragile man, incapable of making rational decisions, and Maria as an opportunist who had taken advantage of the situation. Then it was Ms. Vance's turn. She presented all the psychological reports, the social workers' evaluations, Gabriel's school reports showing significant improvement in his performance, and photos of the family in happy moments. She also presented testimonies from neighbors, the school principal, and even the manager of the supermarket where Maria worked, all attesting to their character and dedication. Finally, the judge asked to hear from Maria. She stood up, her legs trembling, but her voice was firm. "Your Honor, I know my story isn't perfect. I've been through a lot of hardship. I've made decisions that weren't the best. I left my son alone because I thought I was doing the right thing by accepting a job. But since Edward came into my life, everything has changed. He saved my son. He saved me. And it wasn't for money or personal gain. It was out of genuine kindness. Gabriel loves Edward, and I trust him completely. He is the best thing that has happened to us." The judge took notes, then called Edward. "Mr. Anderson, why do you want to adopt Gabriel?" Edward took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Because he needs me, and I need him. When my family was gone, I thought my life was over. I spent 3 years just existing without purpose, without joy. Until Gabriel walked through my door. He didn't know who I was. He didn't care about my money or my house. He just needed help, and helping him saved me. He taught me that I can still be a father, that I can still make a difference in someone's life. And now I can't imagine my life without him, or without Maria. They are my family, the family I chose, and I will fight for them until the end." The room fell silent. Even Frederick's lawyer seemed moved. The judge looked at Gabriel, who was sitting next to Maria. "Gabriel, could you come here for a moment?" The boy stood up and walked to the front, his eyes wide with nervousness. The judge knelt down to his level, her voice gentle. "Gabriel, I know all of this is scary, but I need you to be honest with me. Do you want Edward to be your dad?" Gabriel looked at Edward, then at Maria, then back at the judge. "Yes, I do. He's nice. He takes care of us, and he makes my mom happy. He's already my dad. It's just not on paper yet." The judge smiled slightly and gestured for Gabriel to return to his seat. "I will review all the documents and testimonies. My decision will be announced in 15 days. The 15 days dragged on like months. Edward barely slept. Maria was constantly tense, and Gabriel sensed their anxiety, becoming quieter, more clingy. They made a point of keeping their routine normal, of not showing their fear too much, but it was difficult. One morning the lawyer called. Edward answered, his heart in his throat. "Edward, I have good news. The judge has dismissed Frederick's petition. She found that he had no legal standing to contest the adoption, and that he was acting out of personal interest. And what's more, she has authorized the adoption. You are officially Gabriel's legal father." Edward felt his legs give way. He had to sit down. Maria ran to him, her eyes wide with expectation. "Well?" He smiled, his eyes full of tears. "He's my son. Officially." Maria screamed with joy and threw herself into his arms. They were both crying and laughing at the same time. Gabriel, who was in his room, came running down when he heard the noise. "What happened?" Edward knelt in front of him, his hands on the boy's shoulders. "Gabriel, it's official now, you're my son for real." Gabriel looked at him, processing, and then a huge smile spread across his face. He threw himself into Edward's arms, hugging him with all his strength. "I have a real dad now?" "You always did, but now everyone knows it." In the following days, they went to the registry office to make the change official. Gabriel Smith was now Gabriel Smith Anderson. When the boy saw his new name on the document, he traced the letters with reverence. "Smith Anderson. I like it." Edward held the document carefully, storing it as if it were the most precious object in the world. And it was. It represented everything they had built together, everything they had overcome. That night they celebrated with a special dinner. Edward cooked Gabriel's favorite dish, lasagna with lots of cheese, and Maria made a chocolate cake. They put candles on it and sang happy birthday, even though it was no one's birthday. They were celebrating the birth of a new family. After Gabriel went to bed, Edward and Maria stayed on the balcony looking at the stars. He pulled her closer, putting his arm around her shoulders. "Thank you for trusting me, for letting me be a part of Gabriel's life. Thank you for choosing us, for loving us." Edward turned to her, his eyes intense. "I love you, Maria. I really do. It's not just gratitude or convenience. It's love, the kind I thought I'd never feel again." Maria felt her heart race. She raised her hand and touched his face, her eyes shining. "I love you too, Edward. Ever since that day you showed up at the community and got us out of there. You were brave when I couldn't be. You were strong when I was broken. And now you make me feel like I can dream again." Edward kissed her, soft and tender, sealing that moment under the stars. When they parted, they were both smiling, their eyes still moist, but this time with happiness. Life went on, but now with a lightness that hadn't existed before. Edward and Maria openly became a couple. Gabriel was thrilled when they officially told him, though the boy had known for a long time. He even joked that he was the one who had brought them together, which wasn't entirely untrue. The mansion, which for so long had been a mausoleum of painful memories, was completely transformed. Edward finally found the courage to open Julia's room, not to erase her memory, but to honor it in a different way. He stored her most special toys in beautiful boxes, donated the others to the shelter where he volunteered, and turned the space into a study with a small library. He placed a framed photo of Julia on the bookshelf, alongside new photos of Gabriel. Looking at his daughter's picture, he whispered softly, "I hope you're proud of me, my little one. I found a way to keep going. Not because I forgot you, but because I learned that love doesn't end, it just transforms." Maria, who was at the door, heard him and felt her eyes burn. She approached and took his hand. "She is proud. I'm sure of it." Edward also changed the room that had been his and Helen's. He replaced the furniture, changed the decor, created a new space, not to erase the past, but to build the future. And slowly, that room became the place where he and Maria spent their nights talking about plans, dreams, and hopes. Gabriel continued to grow and thrive. He made true friends at school, students who didn't care where he came from, only that he was funny, kind, and good at football. His grades improved significantly, especially in math, and his teacher always praised his progress. At school meetings, Edward and Maria went together, sat side by side, and listened with pride to the praise for their son. Yes, son. Because Gabriel was both their son now, Edward legally, Maria biologically, but both in their hearts. One afternoon, Edward gathered Maria and Gabriel in the living room. He had something important to say. They sat on the sofa, curious. Edward stood nervous in a way that made Gabriel laugh. "Why are you so fidgety, Dad?" "Because I have a very important question to ask." Edward knelt in front of Maria, taking a small box from his pocket. Inside was a simple but beautiful ring with a blue stone that sparkled in the light. Maria brought a hand to her mouth, her eyes wide. "Maria Smith, you gave me my life back. You taught me how to love again, to smile again, to have hope again. I can't imagine a single day without you. Will you marry me?" Maria couldn't speak, just nodded her head frantically, tears streaming down her face. Edward placed the ring on her finger, and she pulled him in for a kiss. Gabriel jumped off the sofa and hugged them both, shouting with happiness. "We're going to be a real family, with a wedding and everything." Edward laughed, ruffling the boy's hair. "We already are a real family, but now it's going to be official too." The wedding preparations began. Maria wanted something simple in the mansion's garden. Edward hired a landscaper to revitalize the space that had been neglected for so long. In a few weeks, the garden was transformed. Flowers bloomed. Again, the grass was trimmed, new saplings were planted, and even a small fountain was installed in the center. Gabriel helped whenever he could. He watered the plants, pulled weeds, planted seeds. Seeing the boy tend to the garden with such care reminded Edward of when he did the same with Julia. It was painful but also comforting, as if the generations were connecting through those simple gestures. The invitations were sent to only a few, close friends Edward had reconnected with after so long in isolation, Maria's co-workers who had become friends, neighbors who had always tried to help, and now finally saw Edward smiling again. And of course the people from the shelter where Edward volunteered, especially the children Gabriel adored. Frederick was not invited, nor would he have been welcome. After the hearing, he had tried to approach again, to apologize, to say he was just worried about his cousin. But Edward was clear. He wanted him to stay away. There was no room in his life for people driven by greed and spite. The week before the wedding was hectic. Maria tried on dresses until she found the perfect one, white, simple, with an elegant cut. That made her feel beautiful. Gabriel got a small suit and spent hours looking at himself in the mirror, thinking he looked like a real grown-up. Edward had the suit he wore at his own wedding to Helen years ago, tailored. He felt a pang as he put it on, but this time it wasn't just pain. It was also gratitude for having loved and been loved then, and for having the chance to love and be loved again. The night before the wedding, Edward couldn't sleep. He stood on the balcony, looking at the moonlit garden. Maria appeared, wrapped in a robe, and sat beside him. "Can't sleep either?" "No, I'm thinking about everything that's happened, how quickly life changes. 6 months ago I was alone, without hope, just waiting for the days to pass. And look where I am now, about to marry you, father to an incredible boy surrounded by people who care. Sometimes it feels like a dream. It's real, and you deserve it. You deserve to be happy, Edward. You too. You've been through so much, fought so hard for Gabriel. You deserve all the happiness in the world." Maria rested her head on his shoulder, and they sat there in silence, just enjoying the quiet of the night. The wedding day dawned sunny, with a cloudless blue sky and a gentle breeze that swayed the flowers in the garden. Edward woke up early, dressed carefully, and went down to help with the final preparations. Gabriel was so excited he could hardly stand still, running from one place to another, checking that everything was just right. Maria got ready in her room with the help of 2 friends. When she was ready, she looked at herself in the mirror and almost didn't recognize herself. She looked like a princess who had survived storms and finally found her happy ending. The ceremony was to be at noon. Chairs were arranged in a semicircle in the garden, with a path of rose petals leading to a small altar set up under a pergola decorated with white and lilac flowers. A guitarist played softly in the background, creating a magical atmosphere. The guests arrived and took their seats. Smiling faces, high expectations, emotion in the air. Edward waited at the altar, with Gabriel by his side as his best man. The boy held the rings with such seriousness that some guests had to stifle a laugh. When the music changed, everyone stood. Maria appeared at the start of the path, escorted by none other than Gabriel. It had been his idea. He wanted to be the one to walk his mother to the altar, because he was the one who, in a way, had brought them together. "Mum, you look beautiful." "Thank you, my love. You look handsome too." The two walked slowly, Maria holding her son's hand, her eyes fixed on Edward, who waited for her with an emotional smile. When they reached the altar, Gabriel let go of his mother's hand and formally gave her to Edward, with all the pomp a 7-year-old could muster. "Take good care of her, okay?" "I promise." Gabriel moved to the side, and Edward took Maria's hands. They looked at each other, the world around them disappearing for an instant. There was so much love there, so much gratitude, so much hope. The officiant, a friend of Edward's who was a justice of the peace, conducted the ceremony with simplicity and emotion. He spoke of second chances, of how love can arise in the most unexpected places, of how family is built not just by blood but by choice. When it was time for the vows, Edward went first. "Maria, when you came into my life, I was lost. I thought my purpose was gone, that there was no reason to continue. But you and Gabriel showed me there is still so much to live for. You taught me that it's possible to love again without betraying the past. I promise to love you, to respect you, to support you in every moment. I promise to be the best partner I can be. And I promise that Gabriel will always have in me not just a father but a friend and a protector." Maria wiped away tears before she spoke, her voice choked but firm. "Edward, you appeared when I needed you most. You saved my son, you saved me, and you gave us a family. You made me believe that I can do more than just survive. With you I truly live. I promise to love you every day, to support you in every battle, and to build a life full of joy and love by your side. And I promise I will always honor the memory of Helen and Julia, because they were part of who you are, the incredible man that I love." There wasn't a dry eye in the garden. Even the officiant had to pause to compose himself before continuing. "By the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Edward pulled Maria in for a kiss, and everyone applauded and cheered with happiness. Gabriel jumped up and ran to hug them both, creating a scene the photographer captured perfectly. The three of them embracing, smiling, a complete family. The reception was simple but full of joy. Delicious food, live music, laughter, and lively conversation. Gabriel danced with his mother, then with Edward, and then with all the children who were there. Edward and Maria danced together, lost in each other's eyes, while the guests watched emotionally. At the end of the afternoon, as the sun began to set, painting the sky orange and pink, Edward got up on a small improvised stage and asked for everyone's attention. "I want to thank you all for being here with us on this very special day. Many of you saw me at my worst when I thought there was nothing left for me. And today I am here, married to the woman I love, father to an incredible boy, surrounded by people I care about. Life is strange. Sometimes it takes everything from us, but sometimes it also gives back in ways we never expect. Gabriel walked into my house by chance, but he changed everything, and I am eternally grateful for that. To Maria, to Gabriel, and to all of you, thank you for being part of my story." The applause was deafening. Maria joined him on stage and kissed him again, while Gabriel shouted from the middle of the crowd, "That's right, Mom, kiss him again!" Everyone laughed, and the party continued late into the night. When they were finally alone, well into the early morning, Edward, Maria, and Gabriel sat on the steps of the mansion's entrance, looking at the garden still lit by twinkling fairy lights. Gabriel was almost asleep, leaning between them. "It was the best day of my life," Maria sighed, content. "Ours," Edward corrected, putting his arm around her. Gabriel yawned. "When am I getting a little brother?" Edward and Maria exchanged a surprised look and then laughed. "Easy there. Champ, let's take it slow." "But I want a brother, or a sister, I don't care, I just don't want to be an only child." "Maybe one day," Maria said, kissing the top of his head. "For now, let's just enjoy the three of us." Gabriel accepted, closing his eyes and finally falling asleep. Edward carried him to his room, gently laying him down and covering him with the comforter. He stood there for a moment, just watching, his heart full. Maria appeared at the door, and they left together, leaving a nightlight on. In the hallway, Edward pulled her closer. "Thank you for today, for everything. Thank you for giving us a family." The following months brought a routine of happiness. Edward returned to work, taking on civil engineering projects that truly interested him, no longer out of obligation, but for pleasure. Maria was promoted at the supermarket, becoming the manager of one of the branches. Gabriel continued to grow, learn, and smile. The mansion, once cold and empty, was now full of life. Music playing in the mornings, the smell of fresh food, laughter echoing through the rooms. Gabriel's drawings stuck to the fridge with colorful magnets, photos of the new family spread across the walls. The old portraits of Helen and Julia were still there, but now they shared space with new memories, creating a gallery of loves that complemented rather than excluded each other. Edward planted a tree in the garden in memory of Helen and Julia, and every time Gabriel watered his own plants, he watered that tree too. It was a way of keeping their memory alive, of teaching the boy that love has no end. It only transforms. One March morning, Gabriel woke up excited. It was his 8th birthday. He ran downstairs to find the living room decorated with balloons and a table piled with gifts. Edward and Maria were there, smiling. "Happy birthday, son." Gabriel hugged them both tightly, then ran to open his presents. A new bike, games, books, clothes. But the gift that moved him the most was a photo album that Edward and Maria had put together. It contained photos from the day Gabriel first entered the mansion, thin and scared, to recent photos at school, in the garden, at the wedding. The last page had a photo of the three of them together, hugging, smiling, with a handwritten caption, "Our family, our love, our story." Gabriel ran his fingers over the photos, his eyes shining. "Can I keep this forever?" "It's yours," Edward replied, "so you never forget where we came from and how much we love each other." "I'll never forget. Never." That night, after the birthday party with friends and a lot of mess, Gabriel went to bed happy and exhausted. Edward and Maria stayed in the living room, cleaning up, but in no hurry. They worked side by side, exchanging smiles, stealing kisses, simply enjoying each other's company. "Do you think Helen and Julia would approve of all this?" Maria asked suddenly, hesitantly. Edward stopped what he was doing and looked at her seriously. "I'm sure of it. They would want to see that I found a way to be happy again, that I didn't give up, and that Gabriel is receiving all the love he deserves." Maria nodded, relieved. Sometimes she was afraid she was occupying a space that wasn't hers, of being an intruder in a story that hadn't started with her. But Edward always reassured her, always made her feel that her place was legitimate and deserved. A few months later, at a routine doctor's appointment, Maria found out she was pregnant. She was in shock in the doctor's office, not knowing how to react. When she told Edward that night, he was silent at first, then a huge smile spread across his face. "Really? We're having a baby?" "We are. Are you happy?" "I'm more than happy. I'm complete." They told Gabriel the next day. The boy jumped for joy, shouting that he was going to be the best big brother in the world. He spent weeks planning how he would teach the baby to play football, ride a bike, and draw pictures. The pregnancy was smooth. Edward was overprotective, always attentive, always careful. Maria laughed at his excessive concern, but deep down, she loved it. Gabriel helped too, bringing pillows, fetching water, talking to his mother's belly. When little Sophia was born on a December morning, the family was complete. Edward held his daughter in his arms and cried, but they were tears of pure joy. It was as if the universe was telling him he deserved a second chance, that he could be a father again without guilt, without fear. Gabriel was enchanted by his sister. He would spend hours by her crib just watching, touching her tiny hands, whispering that he would protect her forever. Maria, still in the hospital bed, looked at Edward holding Sophia and at Gabriel by his side, and felt that she was finally home. Not in the mansion, not in London, but there, in that family unit they had built together, piece by piece, day by day. The following years were filled with growth and learning. Sophia grew up fast, looking like her father, but with her mother's sweet temperament. Gabriel became a responsible, studious teenager, protective of his sister. Edward and Maria grew old together, accumulating new memories, overcoming new challenges, always hand in hand. The mansion continued to be their home, but now it was also a refuge for others. Edward and Maria started a social project, opening their doors once a month to welcome vulnerable mothers, offering legal guidance, emotional support, and connections to decent jobs. It was a way to give back, to ensure that other women didn't go through what Maria had. Gabriel, when he grew up, decided to study law to help even more with the project. Sophia, inspired by her father, wanted to be an engineer. And Edward and Maria just watched, proud, seeing their children become incredible people. One winter evening, many years after that first meeting, Edward was on the balcony, now older, his hair completely white, but with a peaceful smile on his face. Maria joined him, also aged, but still beautiful in his eyes. "What are you thinking about?" "Everything. About how everything changed that day Gabriel walked through my door. How a lost child saved a broken man. How you taught me to love again. How we built all of this together. It was a miracle. It was a choice. We chose not to give up. We chose to fight. We chose to love." Maria rested her head on his shoulder, and they sat there looking at the stars, just as they had done so many years ago. The mansion in Kensington was no longer an empty, sad house. It was a home full of life, love, and hope. Where there was once silence, there was now laughter. Where there was once neglect, there was now care. Where there was once pain, there was now healing. Edward Anderson, Maria Smith Anderson, Gabriel Smith Anderson, and Sophia Anderson. A family united, not by chance, but by choice. A family that proved it's never too late to start over, that love can be reborn from the ashes, and that sometimes miracles come disguised as small, lost boys on a cold October night. And so, the story that began with a man isolated in his mansion, lost in painful memories, ended with a complete, happy family, full of love. Because in the end, it is love that heals. It is love that transforms. It is love that saves. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Edward, Maria, and Gabriel has touched your heart. If you were moved by this journey of new beginnings, overcoming adversity and love, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments what marked you the most. Every day, we bring intense stories like this one, which reveal the deepest side of the human soul, which show that it's never too late to start over and that love can arise in the most unexpected places. We'll see you in the next episode with another story that will move you.